On this week's Carrier App, we speak with Global Wireless Solutions to discuss pros and cons of various wireless network testing methods that have become central to carrier marketing efforts. All right, well, thanks for joining us in this week's Carrier Wrap. I'm your host, Dan Meyer, Editor-in-Chief here at RCR Wireless News. And this week, we are joined by Paul Carter, who's the CEO of Global Wireless Solutions, talking a bit about testing, I guess. So, hey, Paul, thanks for joining us this week. We appreciate it.
Thanks, you're welcome. Good to be here.
Good deal. Maybe start off with, before we dive into kind of the topic here at hand, maybe give a little background on the company there, just so we get some insight on kind of what you guys do, maybe your formation, kind of how you guys participate in the mobile telecom.
Sure, absolutely. Well, the company is Global Wireless Solutions, or GWS. We call ourselves wireless network testing specialists. In 2016, we're celebrating now our 20th year of operation. We've been, collecting data on the wireless networks, actually, network performance data for many years. We've collected over 30 million road miles of data collection, makes us, we believe, the largest independent provider of these types of testing services in the world. I think 30 million miles is something like 65 times to the moon and back. So we've had a lot of vans on the road collecting a lot of data for a long time.
Very good, very good. Well, obviously, I think one of the topics I wanted to discuss with you a bit was, I think we're all familiar now with the fact that network testing has become a very big part of the telecom market, the mobile market these days. It seems like every advertisement is a new carrier claiming superiority in some sort of network performance testing. I think from you, I know you wrote a column for us a little while ago, kind of touching on the various methodologies there that go on, and maybe why carriers can claim superiority either one way or another. And I guess maybe get news to start off with. I guess what's your view on kind of all the hype that's currently surrounding this space that's being used, in terms of kind of the marketing efforts and stuff. It does seem like it's kind of a big part of what operators are doing nowadays. I guess what's your view on the hype around all of that?
Well, I think it's a very good thing. I think that the reason why the wireless operators are making these types of claims is the fact that consumers care a lot about network quality. So we have recently performed a survey in North America looking at 7,000 people, asking them about their habits in terms of why, what services they prefer, what they use the most on the networks, and so on. Right after price and value in terms of choosing network contracts, it's network reliability and network coverage are the most important things. So it's clear that consumers care, significantly about the performance of the wireless networks. And I think, as these networks are getting more competitive, they have to seek to differentiate themselves, and they're doing that sometimes with making network performance claims. So I think it's really good news that the operators are making claims. The concern, if you like, from my side, though, would be that the claims make sense to consumers, and that the claims, are consistent in their nature, let's say, and that they provide some sort of meaningful information to the end user. And I think, that's perhaps a concern. And these days, the traditional way that these sorts of claims have been made is based on rigorous collection, driving, with test equipment inside vans, driving around the country. Like I said, we've driven 30 million miles, so that's sort of the way that this has traditionally gone. Yeah. And I'll describe a little bit later, some of what that means in terms of collecting rigorous data. But in recent years, obviously, particularly with the advent of smartphones and development of apps that a lot of people develop, folks have come to the realization that you can develop an app to sort of collect data on the wireless networks as well, and then in some cases you can use that app in a crowdsourced sort of scenario where people download it, or an agent is pre-installed on people's phones, or a user downloads an app. And then they run that app. They initiate a test themselves, or if it's an agent in the background, it might just be running. You might have downloaded Angry Birds or some other game, and while you're playing that game, there's some sort of testing going on behind the scenes and reporting, that information. So so that's kind of what's been going on, and each of these different capabilities, if you like, are crowdsourced, and then there's using an app in a controlled manner. So that one is the most simplest method, as I mentioned, is sort of crowdsourced. Then the next sort of level is developing an app that can be used to test the networks in a controlled manner with devices that you understand, about, the devices and testing configurations that are variable, but that someone like us is using. Mm-hmm. Those types of solutions don't have the thorough, detailed engineering level information, but they do have quite a number of parameters that you can use to assess the network performance. So then if you go to the more sophisticated way, the more rigorous way, the way that we've been collecting for years, that's using commercial test equipment that we then deploy in vans or in backpack solutions to do walk testing and venue type testing. And we've tested up to 30 different devices at a time, testing both the voice networks and the packet data networks. And then again, scripts are sent to these automated scripts are sent to the devices, making calls at the same time in the same place, the same location, with firmware that we were able to make voice call testing and data testing. On the voice call, we can get mean opinion score, which standardized voice quality testing called Polka is the current standard. Mm-hmm. We can, since we can control the phones and the devices that we test with, we can have the most up-to-date devices with, the most up-to-date technologies, which means that we can take advantage of whatever the networks are giving us. And then we can do a lot of rigorous quality assurance, validation, and analysis on this data. If you go back to the crowdsourced scenario, there are a lot of companies these days coming out with different claims based on different crowdsourced type of information. Yeah. These companies sort of go up and down in terms of their PR from my perspective, crowdsourced information is very good for assessing the pulse of the heartbeat of a network. It's good for collating a lot of information, and you can see pretty quickly if there's a systematic change or technology change, let's say, on a network. Let's say, as we've been testing just probably the last 15 years, just to let you know the different technology changes that have gone through a company like AT&T, have gone from GPRS to Edge to UMTS to HSPA to HSPA Plus to dual carrier HSPA to LTE Advanced, and then adding a voice over Wi-Fi, a voice over LTE. All of these changes, obviously, they're changing to get technology, to get performance changes on the network, and to provide extra capacity and all the rest of it. And so a crowdsourced solution can definitely help you see that sort of those incremental changes in the network. They could also help with to understand, for example, if a software load, in the past there was a wireless operator that had a bad software load from their infrastructure vendor, and within 24 hours of deploying it, one of these crowdsourced scenarios, that identified a dramatic performance change, and so therefore they were able to sort of identify that and fix that. Mm-hmm. But in terms of side-by-side evaluation of networks, crowdsourcing doesn't do that. Basically, what you have with crowdsourcing is, again, whether it's an app on there or an agent on there, the data is collated from different devices at different times, different locations, even within the same building. You could have, if it was within a building, it doesn't matter where. There could be, obviously the devices are everywhere, but it's coming at different, testing the networks at different times, different places, the phones themselves are different types of devices that you're testing, right? Could be 1 year old, could be 5 years old, could be 10 years old. Could be probably 10 years old.
Could be.
It could be. But with different firmware, different capabilities. And so there's an argument that this is closest to the customer experience. Because it, after all, is taking data off customers' devices. But again, I would argue that particularly if you're using, if a significant portion of your data is from devices that are older, then it's perhaps not representative of the current network. And so, from our perspective, what we try to do is test the network performance from the customer's perspective. And that's not always the same thing, right? Because again, we're trying to test the network performance. We're not necessarily trying to test, your experience using a particular app on your device or using a series of apps at the same time on your device. So we can never mimic everything. And so all we can do is to try and systematically test these networks in a way that is fair to all networks. And so I always sort of, talk about crowdsourcing and liken it to, it's like a 100-meter final, for in the Olympics, where, the runners are all starting within a stadium, but they're running in different directions, and they're going at different times, they're all running 100 meters, but they're sort of coming and going from different times and different, directions. One has the wind in their back, one has rain going on, all these different types of things. And that's truly what can happen. And the other problem is that these networks, as I mentioned, all those different technologies, all of those technologies that I mentioned earlier, I don't know how many there were, 9 or 10 of them, they still exist in the system today. So at any given time, your phone can roll you back, if there's to any of those technologies. So it's the systems, they really are systems that these networks are full systems, and they're very complicated. So truly understanding why calls are failing, why calls or data sessions are not successful, to understand whether the issue is a network level issue or a device level issue is as a non-trivial matter. And so even in our case, even where we have in the rigorous benchmarking where with sophisticated test equipment, we have access to all this network level layer 3 information. So when you press send on your phone and that device then tries to make a call through the network, there's a lot of communication between your device and the network the phone says, I'd like to make a call. The network says, okay, I can hear you. And it says, do this, do that, do the other. And there's a whole sequencing of events that we're able to log, essentially, in addition to understanding, success rates about blocks and drops and all the other traditional KPIs. So again, if a call fails, we can understand whether the call failed because the device had an issue, which is really shouldn't be part of the mix, right? If you dropped your device yesterday and all of a sudden somehow the antenna got upset, or it's hanging because you've got so many apps open at the moment that that it seems like the network's got the problem, but really it's just because your phone processor can't handle the situation. You need to know that, and you need to take that out of the equation. And so each of these different types of testing scenarios essentially allow you different windows into the network and different levels of information and different levels of rigor in terms of really whether or not an issue is existing in the network or not existing in the network. And I think, too, the other problem with crowdsourcing, if it's a crowdsourced solution where the user initiates a scenario, then typically just human nature, I think typically a person will press, or will run the speed test app when there's an issue. And, and so a lot of times I think you're going to have data, which is, I think, probably either extreme, probably when there's an issue or when you think it's really, blisteringly hot. You don't sort of run them, I don't think, just, I've got 5 minutes in the afternoon, I'm just going to run a speed test. I just don't think you do that. And so I think even the data, even though we're believing that this data is a representative of a general population, I think there are still pieces of that puzzle that are sort of misleading. Another problem with this crowdsourced data is that a lot of these test types, or the throughputs that are presented, are capacity tests, for want of a better word, or they're network stress tests. So what they do, what the test folks do, is they set up multiple threads. They open multiple threads or sockets on the phone, and they send large files, through this at the same time to see what the network can give you. And so oftentimes when you hear people making claims about the fastest network or whatever it is, this is based on a capacity type test. Which actually, up until some devices now allow you to, they will automatically do that. But the vast majority of devices, and historically, you don't ever see these capacities. Again, I liken this to buying a Bugatti Veyron, which can do 254 miles an hour. But if you were driving on most roads in the US, I don't think you'd achieve the 250. And so that's not a great use case of that car. And so that's what, again, a speed test does for you. So it's not even a typical, so the argument is this is the closest to the consumer and this is what consumers do. And then they do a test that isn't what consumers do and isn't the way that people use their device. So, and another issue with crowdsourced data, crowdsourced apps, is that the vast majority of them focus on data testing only, voice testing. So, so recently we engaged a company to do a survey for us of 7,000 users in North America, and we asked them. One of the first questions was, "What services do you use on your phone?" And I think we had about 14 different types of choices, from making calls or send text or sending emails, browsing, web browsing, social networking, streaming video, sending videos, all that sort of stuff. The number one service was making or receiving calls. That was like basically 81% of the people said that. If you dropping down to social networking, that was using their phone for social networking, which obviously everyone says they do. That's about 48%. So I mean, it's quite a bit down. And then when you get to streaming video or sending videos, that's down in the 30s. So video is important. No, don't get me wrong. I do not disagree that fast data rates are important and video is important, but still, voice is in terms of all the services, the service that people use the most. When we ask people if you could only choose one service, what service would you choose? Voice again was king. 41% chose voice. So using your phone for social networking was less than 4%. So basically 10% of the voice. Mm-hmm. And streaming video and all the rest of it was, as if that was one service only, that was only 1%. Again, I'm not suggesting that you shouldn't test data, but I think you need to be able to test voice and data services together. And I think you need to understand voice quality as well as not just understanding how successful the voice connection is. Can you get onto the network? Can you stay on the network? And how fast can you get onto the network? You also understand the voice quality. Of course, a lot of the wireless operators these days are deploying voice over LTE and high definition voice. So clearly, voice quality is important to consumers. As a matter of fact, again, when we asked the consumers the top 5 aspects, to describe the top 5 aspects of network performance, number 1 of that was calls always connect when you dial. Number 2 was voice quality. Not good data reliability didn't even make it into the top 5. So, again, it's important to stress the voice is still king on these networks. So I think uncontrolled crowdsourced testing has a value, but it's not this nirvana that I think a lot of folks today are sort of proclaiming it can have. And how you represent that data is also interesting, because if you go, there are a number of these companies have websites where they present summarized data of in a particular area. And again, what you don't know about this data is, was this collected in a building? Was it collected from a phone in a car? Was it on the street? So how does that represent? If you look at this and try to see how will that, how will looking at this data impact or my performance relate to that, you just won't be able to tell. And as an interesting side note, we recently engaged by the BBC in the UK to identify not spots in some cities in the UK. And so to sort of help me on my way, I looked at some of these crowdsourced websites to see if they could identify some not spots for me. And I found some around a football stadium in the UK. And so I went and tested around there myself, found perfect performance, perfect coverage on all operators. And so I couldn't understand why it was literally showing, performance. So I talked to one of the operators there, and he said, yeah, during the game day, their network falls apart at the stadium. So clearly, what you have from a crowdsourced scenario, you have more users at the game day, and so they have more data actually from that time. But the amount of, if you want to look at it as a percentage of time, because obviously people look at our data and say, well, it's just a snapshot drive. Well, looking at, game day data, that's probably less than 1% or less than 0.5% of the time people are actually at that stadium. And so while you're there, you want the performance to be good. Yeah. But if you're representing that, I think you need to represent the performance at a stadium that's full separately from, just a regular performance at that area. So there are lots of difficulties, if you like, with portraying that sort of information, with collecting data in a meaning and presenting that data in a meaningful way, and being able to rely on this sort of data.
Yeah.
But the trouble is, though, that the rigorous solution that we've had over the years is too expensive to collect even more data than we have. So I think where things need to go, and this is where we're doing also, we've developed our own app to do control testing. So as opposed to just sort of deploying it in thousands of other people's devices, which we have no control over or no knowledge over, we've developed an app that we can deploy and do our own testing with. It doesn't give us all of the network level information that we get from our other test equipment, but it gives us about 150 network level parameters. And it also, we can change the testing configuration. We can do voice and data, which is also important. And so, for example, when if we have an event like the Super Bowl, we recently tested at the Super Bowl with our app. And so we're able to deploy a number of people in different places of the stadium with a number of phones each to get a lot more data, to get accurate information, but also to allow it to be portable and to make it a lower cost in the collection side. So I do think that's probably one certain direction. Even there, you still can't get everything you need, and you still because particularly on the engineering side, when you deliver information to any on engineers, they say, I don't believe the data. You have to, so you have to literally step by step through this and validate, show them how the data is validated or not validated. And it's a non-trivial exercise. And so the less information you have on the collection side, obviously the less analysis, the less reliable the data becomes. And of course, you also can't do statistics on drop call rates, block call rates, and that sort of stuff if someone uses their phone once a month from a crowdsourced app. You can't collate it on a per device basis or even a per time basis. So the statistics become, I think, a little bit more less meaningful as well. So again, oftentimes when you hear reliability claims, those claims, in terms of success rates, getting on the network, voice or data, those will be made by people like us, with test equipment. When you hear throughput claims, then most likely those are probably coming from some sort of crowdsourced solution. And if you hear, massive throughput claims, then those are capacity tested probably on the crowdsourced. So so there are different types of claims. The different types of claims can also indicate probably the source of the collection. And then even within those different buckets of the claims I just mentioned, let's say reliability, a competing company could have a different reliability number than ours because they, let's say, drove half as many markets as ours. Because in this benchmarking world, there are no real standards, actually. There are standards for some of the trigger points where you start a collection point, where you end it, and some of those, although not all of these crowdsourced folks would apply to those even. There are ETSI standards in some of those. But there are looser standards in terms of, where you drive, how many miles you collect, what percentage of population you cover, these types of things. And so it's possible then for different people with different devices, collecting in different areas, different routes, different markets, to have different results essentially. And so, this is the part of the problem is this is what at the end of the day presented to the consumer. And interestingly enough, we did also ask the consumers in our survey, did they believe claims? And high-speed claims, reliability claim, coverage claims, different types of claims we asked them. And believe it or not, over 50% did agree with their operators' claims. So, it's interesting because people, I think, generally do believe these claims.
Yeah, sure.
But of course, the interesting thing, though, is that, of course, each of us generally have a knowledge of one operator. We don't generally have a knowledge of performance of multiple operators at the same location, or even, where we live, work, and play, which is, I guess, where we mostly care. And so we kind of have a knowledge of our own operator. And so it's kind kind of interesting how we nonetheless believe that either ours is better or worse, than others. You have that sort of general inherent belief always. So it's an interesting space.
Yeah, that's for sure. I guess it seems like, looking back, overall, obviously, all these different ways of doing this all kind of lead to a bigger picture of things, but it's how the carrier presents it. And obviously, with the commercials and everything, it's always about the fine print, I'm guessing, for consumers. I mean, obviously, they're not going to have time to read all that fine print. That's kind of the whole point of fine print. But again, it's how operators present this information to customers and how they use that information themselves. So obviously, a lot happening in that space today.
Yeah, well, I think, again, it depends. Different countries have, they present this sort of information in different ways in different countries. Sometimes the operators themselves can't make the claim, and then a third party needs to make the claim. Obviously, over here, for many years, Verizon were making claims themselves about data that they were collecting themselves, which was, in itself quite interesting. And so whether or not a third party needs to collect the data, whether or not the processes that the third party deploy need to be independent, all of these sorts of things, like you said, are in the sort of fine print. But obviously, again, in recent times, particularly with the deployment of LTE, and in some cases where one operator may have deployed LTE, ahead of the curve based on, compared to the other operators, they then may have wanted to make a throughput claim, and sort of and suggesting that their 4G LTE coverage was better or performance was better than everybody else. And so that's where I think, and particularly because it sort of tied in at the same timing with the prevalence of these apps doing the same sort of thing, I think that's been quite interesting. And that's, I think that's taken us down a path that's really it shouldn't have done. So I think it's what's happened is, when you focus on a network throughput issue or capacity speed test or whatever, I think what tends to happen then, that's just one of many aspects of network performance. I can mention that, you have voice connectivity, data connectivity. Can you get onto the network? Do I stay on the network? Is the quality good when I'm on the network? Over and over again, what we see again from our surveys and from, I see from other surveys, what consumers want are robust, reliable networks that do what they want when they want. If you're using, depends on the definition of your video, but whether 2 meg throughput or 4 meg throughput, whatever, somewhere in that range is probably going to give you adequate enough bandwidth to watch a video on your phone today. Obviously the high definition, all the rest of it, you'll need more. But the point is that most people are right now are satisfied with that. They don't need 50, 60 megabits per second, 70, 80, whatever it is, whatever that number is. It doesn't give them anything more. And matter of fact, even though the network can do that, and maybe it does more with carrier aggregation, 2-3 channel carrier aggregation, these networks are getting faster and faster. And no one would ever want the operators to stop pushing the envelope on the technology. But at the same time, consumers want the devices to do what they want at the time they want it. And so I think it's important to give them information to allow them to understand the overall performance of the voice and the data and the video and all of these things together. So the reason we did this survey that I mentioned is that we wanted to tie that back so that we collect all these metrics with our benchmarking. We wanted to basically connect the two to use the metrics we collect from the drive testing with all the customer preferences, so that we can rank networks based on what customers care about, as opposed to me thinking whatever, or you thinking somebody else randomly coming up with like data is more important, and I think it's more important than downlink, or downlink's more, whatever. It's because this is. It's not my business to decide that, and so so that's why we did this survey, so that we can input that and we can provide a rounded metric, to look at sort of overall network performance. And I think that's where this business should be, or this industry should be going into. And I think that's where responsible wireless operators, that's the sort of direction they should be going in terms of understanding and presenting information to consumers, because consumers do care. They clearly care about reliability. They clearly care about the quality of the network. And so any information that we can give them to help that, I think it's a win-win for everybody.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, well, obviously, it's great insight. I mean, like you said, you guys are doing a lot of work and trying to make sure that there is a fuller picture available for everybody involved. And at the end of the day, it's obviously up to the carriers to kind of present that information to customers. But yeah, as long as we kind of keep moving down that road where it's a clearer picture involved, I think that's a big part of this whole process there. But yeah, obviously, great insight today, Paul. We definitely appreciate the time on that today. And I guess for the most part, I'm going to stick with whenever anybody asks me who has the best network, I will just stick with depends where you're standing at what time of day and who's around you at that time as well, because it does seem like it is so variable, what you're doing, where you're at and stuff. So who knows what you'll get. So.
Well, there are definitely very localized performance variations, right? And so that goes without a doubt. And again, there are some networks are better than others,
sure.
Let's say. And so on average, even though your house, you may experience a problem with one operator and not another, or where you work or whatever, but I think in generalizations that some operators are better than other. And so it's what you said is right, but it's the best way though to understand this is to really collect this information and to collect it in a fair, meaningful and rigorous way. And at the end of the day, that's what we're here to do, and we will continue to support the operators in that space.
That sounds good. Hey, again, Paul, appreciate the insight on this today. Obviously, as this kind of use of these metrics continues, I'm sure hopefully we'll touch base again on the topic. We'll kind of see how it's been evolving and changing, and maybe get some insight as well. But thanks again so much for the time today. We appreciate it. Well, thanks for watching this week's show, and make sure to check us out again next week for a new episode.